Hello, thank you for joining us today. And we're here to talk about Makey Makey and our full day game design challenge. Come on, Derek. Ready?
Yeah.
I'm gonna pass this to you. Nice. It's
Oh, it
upside
was
down.
upside down.
He
Oh,
failed.
okay.
He failed at Zoom. We're here to talk about this game design challenge that Jim and Michael worked with together to do, and it was quite an epic collaboration. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys about this. So I'm Colleen Graves, and I create our content and I try out crazy stuff with kids. So I spent today trying out projects with students just to learn more about what it's like to be in the classroom and teach with kids. I taught for 15 years. So it's nice to be able to still go do that. And this is Derek, and he
Hello.
is our product manager.
Yeah,
And
product manager. Oh, sorry, Colin, you're gonna
go
introduce
ahead,
me.
you can do
No, I
it.
was just gonna say I've been with Makey Makey for a while, been on a few of these things, so it might be familiar to some of you, but head up some product and management and product development. And to be honest, I just wanted to be here to kind of geek out with these two gentlemen about what they're doing. So that's what I'm here for, and ask questions. I just am on camera rather than looking at my screen. So that's
Yeah, and actually, once they start talking, Derek, we can just turn our cameras off and like let them have the show.
sounds
And so this is Michael, Michael Stone. He's the Vice President of Innovative Learning at the Public Education Foundation in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And you joined them in 2016, and you started as a high school math teacher before you moved to a STEM school, Chattanooga, and served as the first Fab Lab lead teacher. I'm jealous of that. It's one of those jobs I always wanted to have. And now in your current role, you lead the largest school-based Fab Lab network in the world, which has 53 labs across the US. So wait, I thought that maybe this Public Education Foundation was only Chattanooga, but you're saying it's goes everywhere.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
We serve mostly Southeast Tennessee.
Yeah.
Work with schools across Southeast Tennessee, but the work with the Fab Labs in schools garnered a lot of national attention. So we've started working with schools and school districts across the country to help bring labs to different communities like Milwaukee, Indiana, et cetera.
That's very, very cool. And I think it's a focus on rural communities, right?
In Indiana, it certainly is. Yes, ma'am.
Mhm. And then we have Jim David, who is the assistant principal at STEM School Chattanooga. So you used to work together.
yes.
I just figured it out. I just did
We
it.
still work together. Yeah.
You still work together, but like at school.
Yep.
And you're also a district innovation facilitator, which is a great thing to be able to do for your district. You've been in public education since 2003, and you're now an assistant principal at STEM School Chattanooga and an innovation facilitator. And you work with helping teachers and admin create problem and project-based learning. And it's really cool to see what you guys are doing together. So that's why we're here today.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to start off with, so I guess if you want to tell us anything more about Public Education Foundation before we move on, or if it's already in there, we can start talking about Blue Sky Institute, which is how this whole thing ties together.
Sure, I'll give a little bit of background and maybe on both. As you mentioned, I did have an opportunity. Jim hired me. I had an opportunity to work under him at the STEM School Chattanooga back in 2014. They opened the first Fab Lab in the state of Tennessee. If you're unfamiliar with Fab Labs, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I had an opportunity to do that. Went on and worked at NSF for a year, working in their SICE directorate, the Computer Information Sciences and Engineering Directorate. And from there, I came back and joined the Public Ed Foundation. It's not actually a foundation like a philanthropic organization. We're a local nonprofit that supports public schools in Southeast Tennessee. We've been around for about 35 years now. Strong partnership with the local school district and the districts surrounding. We've got one big county district, Hamilton County Schools, where STEM schools located. It's a mid-sized district in Tennessee. It's 80 schools serving about 45,000 students, spread across a geographic population geographic area that's bigger than the state of Rhode Island. So it's really interesting because we have all the trappings of sort of urban education, suburban education, rural education, all in one school system. So it's a really interesting opportunity to bring learning experiences to diverse populations and communities and really see how that works across the board. And that's how we got involved with the Blue Sky Institute. So if you'd like, I'll just jump in there and we can kind of get into what I think is the meat and potatoes today. Great. I saw a head nod from Derek, so I'll just jump in there. So Jim, David, and I had an opportunity to work with Blue Sky. Those that are familiar that are domestic in the U.S., Blue Cross Blue Shield is a large insurance organization, insurance provider in the United States. They've got a headquarters in our community in Chattanooga, Southeast Tennessee, and they recognized a need at their local organization. And I have to commend them. They really were forward thinking, not just in how they would attack the need, but in how they would make sure they were providing robust opportunities for students across our community with a specific focus on equity and inclusion in terms of how they provided those opportunities. So specifically, when we go to the next slide, we'll looking at the need at Blue Cross locally. So this is just on their corporate campus here in Chattanooga. They have an IT team that's made up of almost, see a little over 900 members. Despite that, they still have to outsource almost 300 IT/IS jobs per year in information technology, information systems, and they still have about 60 jobs open annually. What's clear, this is unfortunately all too common in organizations, not just in our community, but across the country. We see this dearth of talent and perhaps even interest in computer science. So in Tennessee, we had the data, the next slide. Jim, if we can get the next slide, we had the data in Tennessee. When we looked at job openings, and I want to highlight this first little small bullet, in 2020, there's almost 4,200 job openings for graduates with less than 2 years of experience. So these are not looking for executives. This isn't looking for people with 25 years of experience. This is basically fresh out of college. We had more than 4,100 job openings, but we were only graduating about 1,400 students from college with the appropriate credentials as a state. So Tennessee reflects numbers that are pretty true across the entire country. This isn't a knock on any college or university in Tennessee. The work that's come out nationally, the research that's come out in the last 25 years, and the work with organizations like CS for All, we know that there is a deep need and a growing need for IT and IS professionals. The challenge has been, how do you attract students? And specifically, how do you attract diverse students that can help close some of these gaps? We know there are well-documented gaps in terms of socioeconomic, race, gender gaps in computing. And it's really an opportunity. We're missing out in the field when we isolate to just certain subsets of the population and recruit them into computer science as a degree and certainly as a job. So Blue Cross Blue Shield dreamed up this really interesting Blue Sky Institute. The Blue Sky Institute, simply put, is a post-secondary opportunity. Students graduate high school, they can enroll in the Blue Sky Institute as an alternative to traditional college. They attend college on the Blue Cross Blue Shield corporate campus here in Chattanooga. The college is actually ran through a direct partnership with East Tennessee State University. So students who are being taught by ETSU professors, they're pursuing a accredited computer science degree. And what they do is in 27 months, a little over 2 years, they earn a bachelor's degree in computer science. They do this through job embedded learning, through traditional classes and with accelerated coursework. And as I said, all of their coursework happens on the campus there at Blue Cross Blue Shield. And as they earn this, after they earn this degree, after the 27 months, they are guaranteed a job with the organization with a starting salary well above the median average, the median income for single earners in our community. So they get this, they have a guaranteed job offer starting at around $60,000 per year when they complete the program. And Blue Cross Blue Shield is so confident that the program will deliver for students and that the experience they're delivering for students will be competitive. The opportunity to attend the program is not contingent upon them taking the job. So it's a really interesting opportunity. To make sure it was equitably distributed, Blue Cross worked with my organization, the Public Ed Foundation, and with teachers and guidance counselors, college and career counselors in our community to make sure that they specifically recruited students from our schools that are most underserved historically. So they had a specific emphasis and continue to have a specific emphasis on providing these opportunities to students who traditionally are underrepresented in this field. So the Blue Sky Institutes, they're standing this up a couple of years ago. They know they're going to be working to attract students. They recognize it's an innovative program. Adults hear it and go, that's amazing. We've got to, I would love to have this. Why wasn't this around when I was a kid? And they started working with our foundation to try to look at how could we work with our local public schools to actually recruit students. Like, how do you get kids in? Adults hear it
Yeah.
and are enamored. Kids hear it and are like, this isn't like real college. How do I get into this for real? And so the idea for this game design challenge came about as part of a broader strategy to expose students to computer science opportunities, and then to provide enriching opportunities as they pursue this. I'll pause there, Colleen.
Yeah, what's crazy to me is that I think you just said they go to the Blue Sky Institute and they have a job that they're going to get paid $60,000 a year. That's what you
Yeah,
said.
and for at least the first 2 years, Blue Cross has committed. The first cohort is now in school, and they're now recruiting the second cohort of students. They've committed that they offer a $0 or zero cost scholarship.
Yeah,
So
wow.
whatever financially they qualify for, not loans, but whatever
Mhm.
financially they qualify for, whatever is remaining,
Mhm.
their philanthropic foundation, they cover the rest of the cost for the students. It's a really incredible opportunity.
Can they come put one in Austin so my kid can go?
I'll be happy to pass that along and see. I joke about that, but I do know they are very interested in piloting this locally to see,
Oh,
could this
it'll be
become a
nice.
model for other corporations to look at down the road?
Because it's really cool. So just as an aside, at our old school district I used to work at, we had a similar thing where kids could come and train at the school district, and they would have a teaching job. Like they did this teaching thing. They did a similar thing with teaching, but this is amazing. So I'm like, wait, what? I want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Paul and I are like, yes. So we're learning about the Blue Sky Institute because Michael and Jim led a full day game design challenge with Makey Makey and MakeCode Arcade. And so we're getting to that, Susan. We're just kind of putting all the background in so we know exactly what how this even came about, because a lot of us want to lead a full day game design challenge. So Michael, can you tell us a little bit about working with NSF and how that kind of informed you to have that broader participation in computer science?
yeah, and I'll make sure we go much more quickly through the rest of this, since we've
No,
built some
you're fine.
context. I'll get us
Totally
to the Makey Makey piece. I know that's why people actually signed up to learn today. So yeah, so working with NSF, Jim, if you want to jump into the next slide. Working with NSF, we were able to spend some time really looking at how students get engaged in computer science and computing. And this is where Makey Makey for us provides a really compelling, like fits into an interesting ecosystem. So we started developing this long-term goal where we would build out a full pipeline where it's not just about trying to recruit students into a particular course or pathway or even to a degree or career field, but intentionally providing different kinds of robust entry points so that they can engage with computing, with engineering, with making, with learning in different ways as they go on to pursue these high demand fields. So we love Makey experiences in our maker spaces, in our fab labs, in extracurricular activities, and we see those as really compelling on-ramps that fit inside a lot of the research that's come out of NSF in the last 2 decades around the work. Jim, if you want to go on to the next slide. So knowing that we were trying to recruit for this Blue Sky, we tried to figure out, like, how can we do a thing in a day that gives kids experiences with computing, with game design, with a little bit of taste of ITIS, knowing that in one day you would be facing students, some of whom come in with tons of coding experience, others who come in with no coding experience, and that you would have to try to make it interesting for all of them and also meet all of them where they are. So we built this around some of our work in Fab Labs. Jim, I'm going to ask you if you could skip on to slide 11. Or sorry, slide 10 maybe. Yeah, so Colleen mentioned earlier, we built a whole bunch of Fab Labs. We do a lot of making in schools, and I'm happy to talk about that if there's time at the
I think
end.
you should still talk about it.
Okay. So we'll back up a slide. So Jem, if you want to back up one for me. So for those unfamiliar with Fab Labs, they're essentially fancy maker spaces. The Fab Lab model came out of MIT in the early 2000s, and we took the model and tried to see what could we do to embed this in K-12 school. Specifically, what we wanted to do was we realized there was an opportunity in a rich learning environment to embed these labs in such a way that we could accelerate how students engage in developing, like, the 4 C's. We started calling them process skills. So it's like STEM essential skills, process skills, you can call them what you want to, but things like collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, communication, these skills that we know are critically important and ubiquitously valuable across all industries, across all jobs. They're not unique to any particular sector, but that we historically don't explicitly teach or assess in schools. And we just sort of hope kids develop them as they mature. So that's right, curiosity is absolutely critical in this as well. So what we did was we started embedding Fab Labs in schools, and we developed a learning model that took away the focus on, we didn't hyper focus on technical expertise. Instead, we focused on facilitating experiences where students could have these like deep learning moments that were a consequence of authentic experience. Volkswagen was paying attention. They've got a corporate or a factory here in Chattanooga. Jim, if you want to go to the next, to 2 slides next. Volkswagen made an investment that allowed us to expand these labs. So currently we have 36 labs in our local school district. It's the largest concentration of Fab Labs anywhere in the world, and ours happen to all be in K-12 public schools. We opened our first set of labs in kindergarten through 5th grade last year. So we now have kindergartners that regularly use equipment like 3D printers and laser cutters, because again, it's not about the technology, it's really about the learning, and they're just using the tools in pursuit of deeper learning. So Jim, if you go to the next slide real quick.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. What are kindergarten doing in the Fab Lab?
Yeah, so maybe the better question is like, what are they not doing, right?
Oh, wow.
So what we realized is that things like Makey Makey give us, there's a number of tools out there. Makey Makey is certainly part of our local ecosystem. They give us tools that allow students to engage in more authentic experiences. So often school is relatively trivialized, right? We trivialize learning and make it a strictly academic venture. And what we really appreciate about equipment and technology like Makey Makey is that it allows us to take learning from this cerebral, singular experience that operates theoretical and make it tactile, right? We get to have these like functional experiences, tangible experiences where students can take ideas in their head and make them real. It turns out kindergartners love that, adults love that, even 17 and 18-year-old high school seniors love that. And so this is where Jim and I created the Blue Sky Institute Video Game Design Challenge. It's a one-day challenge where students make a custom video game and a custom video game controller using Makey Makey in less than 6 hours. We show it off, and then they learn about the Blue Sky Institute that I shared about earlier. Jim's going to give you the real sweet stuff about the video game design challenge.
Yeah, so if we go kind of into the deep stuff, hello again, I'm Jim. We put together a way for students to, in one day from the beginning of the day, and I have the agenda up there, from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, they go from like, I don't really understand what's going on, to they are literally on the stage showing off their game and their joystick to Blue Cross executives, employees, their parents. So throughout the day, we have the students, and we're like, you're going to have a video game and a video game controller done by 3:30, and then we're getting on a bus and we're going over to Blue Sky, and you're going to show off your games. And then at the end of that, the Blue Sky people will get to meet with the parents and the students and talk about the Institute. But our job was, of course, this. So to kind of give you an idea, if you're a person who's like, how did y'all do that? I put down a bit.ly link at the bottom. So if you want to steal, borrow any of the stuff there, if you want to harvest, collaborate, whatever educational word you want to go with, you can have it. So really what it started off with was Michael and I, we made all the students work together, and they came up with a big idea, a video game. We had a couple rubrics and scaffolding pieces you'll see in that bit.ly. And then in that video game design challenge, they had to decide kind of what it would look like. From there, we broke them up into 2 different groups. Michael would take a group over, we had them in groups of 2 to 4. And Michael would take half the groups, and they would start working on some MakeCode video games. And I would work with the students on the Makey Makeys. And we would then take the Makey Makeys and try to pair it to the game. So Michael would sit with them and say, all right, here's all the different types of games that you can make in MakeCode. He had some scaffolding pieces in there to kind of help the kids figure out like, oh, okay, this is kind of what we want to make our particular game look like. I would work with the students on the other side, and this is kind of all the pieces that we would end up having the kids have. So just like if you ever use Makey Makeys, you have a bunch of different things kids can play with in order to make to close a circuit. Simple lesson on how a student would create a circuit. One of the beautiful things is if you've used Makey Makey or if you've never used Makey Makey, it's super simple, but you can go super creative with it. So it's easy to plug in and play and work with the game system that Michael was working with. And what I would work with the students on is we would talk about what is form follows function. So I would have the kids learn how to use a Makey Makey. So we talked about the different materials that could actually create a circuit. So all the kids had to kind of go through like, all right, now I understand how a circuit could be done, all the possible ways. Then we actually have the kids meet back with their coding people, talk about their game. So instead of their Makey Makey being looks like a Nintendo joystick, it looks like a sword or it looks like a shield. It looks like the most creative abstract thing you've ever seen before. And the goal was to push the kids as far as I could with creating those simple circuits in odd and different ways that follow the game, whatever the game will look like. So if the game was a jumping type game to score, what are they doing with their joystick to make sure the joystick emulates something that had to do with jumping? If their game had something to do with water, maybe they're using water cups, right, to create the circuit with Makey Makey controller. And what it
Actually, can you, yeah, I think you go back to that one because this is like
Sure.
the meat of yours
Yep.
over here. You got you got.
Yeah.
And this is really good. So did you go through each one of those tasks with them? Like you were like, okay, let's make a joystick button, and they all did a joystick button, and then you
Yes and no. So
okay.
So one of my philosophies of education is getting kids to work as fast as possible.
Mhm.
So after I showed them how to create a simple circuit, right? Like all you got to do is make sure you're connected to the ground and make sure you're connected to the button. And once they kind of figured out how to simple circuit worked, I put them to work. So I've got half the group. So we had 100 students at this event. Michael had 50 on his side. We had a big business space we were in. He took 50 to one side. I had my 50. And what I ended up doing was we're working with, so divide that by about a half, so 25 groups, right? Because they're in groups. And what I would do is like, all right, you need to make sure that you can do these things with your controller. And then I just had them pull up a scratch game, right? To make sure that their controller did what we wanted them to do. So this is all about trying to push them into one, making sure they understood how to simple circuit work, and then to start pushing their brain beyond a controller. I don't have the photo here, but one of the things I showed them was I don't want your controller to look like a controller, right? I don't want it to look, yeah, there you go. Like literally what's cool about this is you can hide that device inside of what they ended up doing is they'd use foam or cardboard or whatever it is to house their Makey Makey, and their joystick would look crazy. But I needed them to understand how a simple circuit worked. I know Makey Makers are really good with food, but we kind of stayed away from the food because I thought because these are all high school seniors, I wanted to push them as far as I could with how could they be creative with their simple circuits. So a lot of them we had buttons. So they use buttons. One of my favorite groups is actually on the next slide, is they had to figure out, they wanted to create a joystick that used their fingers, but they weren't going to use their body as part of the circuit. So when they first started, they went through like 8 iterations, but eventually they learned they had to insulate their fingertips. So their fingertips didn't actually touch the foil or the wire. And then the ground was their thumb. And so they had 2 hands, so that the controller was essentially what they're doing on their fingers to make their person jump and move. Super creative, but that was kind of the push, right? Like, hey, you're high school seniors, like your game is XYZ. Your controller should look like XYZ.
Well, that's
Jim?
why, I'll let you go. I'm sorry, but that's why I jumped in, because like what was exciting about your video was they didn't look like just the same thing over here on a piece of cardboard, because that's what I don't want you to do cardboard, same exact thing. We want to see the most divergent thing and really get you thinking, like, Chuck E. Cheese and Dave and Buster's and whatever the games are, like what kind of gigantic fun game arcade can you make? Sorry,
Yeah,
were you gonna say
that-
something?
that's exactly right. Do you want to make it wearable? Do you want to make it where there's like multiple pieces? Do you want to make it multiplayer where you got to have like 3 players at the same time doing different things? And so the kids did that. And what ended up happening is, so if you go back to the agenda, what ends up happening is you kind of by lunch, right? That's me. I go back to the
Mhm.
agenda. By lunch, they were like, uh-oh, we got to re-talk. So we put purposeful time in our agenda to make sure that the controller people were talking back to the coders. So the coders started off, we're going to build the next Halo. And you're like, no, you're not. It's 1 day, 3 hours. Like, you're not going to do that. It's really going to be 1 level and it's going to be super simple. What are you actually making? So by the time I got after lunch, it was like, all right, so this is a simple XYZ game. And then it's like, okay, all right, now we can actually start honing in on maybe what does our character look like? And then maybe I want to make my character embedded into my controller somehow,
Mhm.
or the aspect of whatever the player is trying to earn.
That's actually an amazing skill you're teaching them, time management.
Yes.
And it's like one of the most important maker skills. Like you have 8 hours to do it. I mean, we watch all these shows now, right? The reality shows do the same thing. Yeah, project management and time management. You watch the booking, the baking stuff, and you have
Yeah.
like you have however many hours to do it. If you don't get it done, you're gonna fail. So
And
it's
what's funny is when you put the time on there, the kids rise to that challenge.
mhm.
If we'd have put 2 days on there, it'd have taken them 2 days,
Yeah.
right? But we put 5 hours, and what ends up happening is they rise to the challenge, and in those 5 hours, they're there, right? Which is
And Jim, we get out of their way, right?
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
we
100%.
we may have 10, 15 minutes of PowerPoint and us talking at the front, and we let them go, right?
And then when
Yeah.
they start talking to each other, right? So like at some point, what ends up happening is they start kind of floating around and they walk from one room to another. They're like, they see another group and they're like, wait a minute, what is that? Well, in this one, we used a aluminum ball, and the ball was connected to the Makey Makey. When you move your joystick around, the ball connects to these two. And so what ends up happening is
Cool.
the kids get that 1 + 1 = 3 idea. Like your
Mhm.
idea, plus my idea is a brand new idea. And so what ends up happening is their joysticks become better and better. And the same thing with the coders. The coders, as they're deep into their code, right, just hammering away at a point where they get a drink or get their pizza for lunch. They look at somebody else's code and they're like, wait a minute, how did you do that? Right?
Mhm.
We did this. And so what ends up happening is, like Michael said, we get out of the way to really push towards those skills that we really want.
Do you make a time where everyone gets up in the middle of it to go look around, or do you just let it all happen naturally?
Yes. Yes.
Exactly.
So there's the natural part comes into when I'll have a kid who like I just want to brag on, and I'll just send people to him or her, right? Like, did you all see this? And it's something I know that kids are going to struggle on. Maybe it's remapping it, right? And some kid got to that quicker, and I'm like, hey, I can help you do this. That person can help you. What ends up happening is I'm taking the distributive leadership is really what's happening, because I want the kids to be the leaders, because then when it's all said and done, when they go brag about their game that evening in front of all these executives and parents, they really own it. It's not, oh,
Mhm.
look, Mr. David coded my Makey Makey.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too, because having run similar things and trying to achieve what you guys are doing, is that students are so well trained to sit in one spot, and that they're doing their own work, that you need to give them license to go look at other people's computers, go look at other people's code, go look at other people's controllers. And not only that, you're like, hey, when you're in trouble, like literally get up and do it, because your project is going to get better from that. It's not a solution to your writer's block. It
Mhm.
is, that is the seasoning in the sauce on that one. It's like you can tell the kids that have gone up and done that more, because they've pulled all of these different ideas together and synthesized them really well. So I'm happy that you guys really did that, and that's part of the day.
Yeah, for anyone who's not on the call now and is watching this as a recording, Paul is also reminding us that in maker-centered learning environment, everyone is a teacher and everyone is a learner. So you have that distributed leadership and distributed studentship. I'm going to make that word up right now. But that, and then, and Michael's saying, yeah, the goal isn't the product, it's the learning, because it's the process that we value, right? Their end games aren't really the what we want. Our real
Right.
goal is everything that happened all day.
Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting about that is the product they make at the end of the day is interesting and compelling enough that adults and executives are fascinated, but it's not like market ready. You couldn't take this and sell it on Etsy, right? And these kids are certainly old enough to know like this isn't a professional product, but they love their product, right?
Mhm.
They are proud of it. Creates an intrinsic hook for them where they're like, that's my thing. I made that. I can't wait to show you. And as Jim said, because it's not my idea that I gave them, they didn't follow my recipe or Jim's recipe and 5 steps and you build the Lego kit.
Mhm.
They started with ideas in their head and cultivated them organically over the day. Like that, it's mine. I own this, right? That level of agency creates a deep sense of self where they start having not just ownership over the product, but ownership over the experience. And that for us in the computer science sort of recruiting space for Blue Sky or whatever, when they reach that level of self-actualization, right? It's an alternative pathway to the top of Maslow's pyramid, right? Where they realize like, I'm good at this. I like this. I could see myself doing this as a career. This is a thing I want to pursue. Like that's much more compelling than a celebrity who's paid to be on a poster with a cute slogan under their name about why we, should have different people in different fields.
Yeah. Can you go back one, Jim? So is that the hand which they insulated the fingers and then
Yes.
put the foil on the
Yes.
fingertips?
Is that not cool? So like,
That's really
so
cool.
yeah, so what ends up happening is you have to use 2 hands to play the game. But yeah, they struggled with insulation. And once they got past that, they were like, it was awesome.
So in that game, what are they playing? Is this the control and this is jump on the thumb? Do you remember?
Yeah, it's like jump and I forget what the other button was. It was 2 buttons they ended up having.
Yeah.
The left hand is, left, right, up, down.
Mhm.
And the right hand was jump and
It was a projectile. It was like Mario Brothers
throw
shooting like
something.
throw something like a fireball or something.
Oh yeah, like fireball. That's cool. And so I think actually, I don't know how much MakeCode games you have up that might be helpful for some people to see because they may have not seen them. A lot of our users are in the scratch. But what are these guys doing? What is this?
guys on the
You have
right
to
side.
explain it. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
guys on the
talk us
right.
through.
Yeah, so this one is it's like a water gun game.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So inside, is embedded the Makey Makeys inside of that, but they wanted to create the button. So on the back of the button is left, right, up, down to move your character. And
Nice.
they have a trigger and a shoot, right?
Cool.
So they just to sit, that was what they got pumped up about. So what they got
Wow.
pumped up, so their hard thing for that particular group was they had made it and then they forgot that they had to make room for their Makey Makey. So they got all excited about it. And so, but it was foam. So it didn't take long to like carve out a little piece, right? To get the Makey Makey in there just right. And then
Nice.
they're like, how do we keep it in there? And they taped it up. But again, it wasn't necessarily how beautiful it is, like Michael said, but it's how pumped up they are about presenting it and calling people over to the point where it's like, you guys got like 30 minutes left to present. Like, and then keep calling people over. Hey, come check out my game. Come check out my game. Come check out my
Yeah,
game.
you're giving them agency. You're making them feel
Yeah.
important. And yeah, let's do the next ones. If you can just tell us a little bit about what they're doing, because we're trying to guess. I can see everyone's
one on the bottom right is a multiplayer game.
uh-huh.
And so this one takes, I think it was just 3 players they had to play this particular, that was the goal, right? Even though you could probably play it with 1 player, the goal was you had to work collaboratively to move your character on the
Nice.
screen. The one on the left was a water game. It was something with a dolphin. So in this one, their simple circuit was them and the water, right? So you hook to I think for this one, was it hooked to a bracelet or was it a necklace, one of the 2, and the necklace would touch you, right? So that would close the circuit. You were the end up closing the circuit every time you touch the water. And depending on if you were touching the up, down, left, right, water would move your, in this one, little dolphin character.
Very cool. And I think we'll have to, I can see the rest of your slides. We'll talk a little bit about MakeCode when we get to that. So yeah, so I like that. You have a question, Derek?
No, I have a question for them about, having taught with MakeCode, but I'll hold it until we talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I can get there pretty quick.
No, you're
here,
good.
so-
You've
Okay.
got We're good
It's
on
a-
time.
Okay, cool. It's a natural segue. That's where we're going. So
Mhm.
for those on the who are listening in who may not be as familiar, excuse me, with MakeCode, and I'm seeing in the chat there. So as Jim said, we actually just the two of us facilitate the whole day. So we have 100 students. We each take 50. But because it's about facilitation and not direct instruction, it's a lot more manageable, right? So we just baked in behaviors, even though the students came from traditional schools and there were 17 high schools represented. When I say rural, I mean rural schools were there, as well as inner city schools, sort of all the trappings of inner city, urban education, and kind of everything in between. So these were students who did not know each other from the other schools. But I'll just say it's easy to create a culture of student agency and distributed leadership when the adults don't get in the way. So when we don't serve as the gatekeepers to learning, but instead are modeling the same behaviors we want the students to have, like they buy in almost immediately. It was fascinating. One of the teachers from one of the schools that serves it's a pretty challenging school to teach in. She said, this is the first time, I can't believe there's 100 students in here working all day. And at no point did any teacher ever have to say, get back on task, get back to your seat. Why aren't you working? Get off your phone, stop watching YouTube. At no point in the day. In fact, when we broke for lunch, we realized we never told them lunch was over. They just were back working.
Yeah.
Like pizza, Cokes everywhere, and the teenagers are working on they're just back to work, was fascinating. I mean, it was truly remarkable to watch. So the slide that's up is sort of it's part of why we really like MakeCode Arcade. So that link is in all of the bit.ly that Jim shared earlier. But essentially, we use MakeCode Arcade as our coding platform and Makey Makey as our hardware interface to allow us to create the controller. MakeCode Arcade is built around the same basic visual programming platform that of MakeCode that's used by Microbit. It's a drag and drop environment that you can also go in and do some work with JavaScript, and I think MicroPython in there as well. Some things we like about it, what's relevant to the slide that's showing here, in our Fab Labs and our sort of maker mentality that we bring to education, we deeply embrace this idea of stages of creating, and it's how we're able to scaffold to 100 students where you have just the two teachers with 100 students. MakeCode Arcade gives us the ability to grab existing games, platformers, side scrollers, space games, whatever, puzzlers, and you can just start with can I go in and see the code from that game? If you've used Scratch before, it's like seeing a shared Scratch app or game that somebody else has created. It's editable. And I don't edit the original. As soon as I edit it, it becomes mine. So I can start editing an existing game. So I can start with no knowledge in the platform, grab a game that I can get my head around, sort of like a Mario Brothers style side scroller, for example. And I can start modifying it. What if I don't want it to look like a Italian plumber? What if I want it to look like a dinosaur? All right, okay, cool. Now I've got to think about how I change my sprite. And what if I don't want it to be jumping in pipes? I want it to be jumping over vats of lava. Well, how do I change my background and interact with the environment? So it allows us to move students from this idea of I just copy directly to I begin to hone and embellish to ultimately I modify and then I finally create. What we've realized is we don't have to be the arbiters of when students move in these stages. They self-select within this architecture. We don't even tell the students this explicitly. We just have this as sort of a schema that we're facilitating with, so that for the student that comes in and is like, I'm in AP Computer Science A, I've made 17 apps already in the App Store, but cool, you can start there, right? Start with your blank screen and run. And for the kids, I've never even played a video game, which doesn't happen often. But for those kids, they can start a copy and sort of have a starting point. That, Jim, if you can go to the next slide.
Well, this is really cool, though, actually.
Go ahead, back up.
I'm sorry.
No, good.
It's just really, really cool because it does push the idea of remixing, and it gives every kid a spot where they can feel comfortable. That's what's really neat about it. Because if I'm just copying, I feel okay with that. And then maybe I feel okay with remixing, and someday that's how I learned Scratch. I had to go look at 20 other Scratch projects that did what I wanted to do before I can get mine to work. And I think that's great.
And I'm just dumbfounded because in our office, I'm in my home shop right now, but in our office, I have pretty much the same thing written on the whiteboard without having ever seen your guys' content or your like. There's a but instead of if you go back real quick, so a couple of
Yeah,
things like
we're
what I
just
had instead
obsessed
of
with
copy.
this.
What I had instead of copy, because I was looking at it from more of a hardware perspective, is repair, right? So,
Mm,
like one of the first things, or not repair, but disassemble. So I'm just taking things apart,
mhm,
and then that kind of leads me to repairing, and then
Mhm.
that kind of leads me into modifying, and then that kind of leads me into actually like hacking something and building something and prototyping something and to a finished physical good.
Right.
What you guys have here is definitely more like, I would say, words that are student friendly and
I like
definitely
repair.
classroom more.
Repair is good because that's how Derek has been making MakeCode arcade projects that he has as tutorials that you get them and you're like, well, that's not fast enough. So you have to repair it to make it correct. So
Yeah.
I like that.
As-
actually.
we see that for us, that's a transferable skill, right?
Mhm.
And it sort of lives outside of computer science, right? It's useful in almost any domain.
Yeah.
It's really right a system to solve problems, to solve problems and to learn new things, right? So those things might be technical, but they might not be. The idea, like this is really how the world works, and certainly the world of coding, right? Like professional programmers are never sitting down with a blank screen going, okay, let me start from absolutely nothing, right? That's just not how things work anymore. So Jim, do you want to jump down to slide 22 real
Yeah.
quick? We'll skip a couple and come back to that.
Sure.
I'm just thinking the flow of the
Go in
conversation,
on the
this might make more
MakeCode.
sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, so like you had asked us in the prep, like what would we change if we could like to make it better? And our jokey answer was we would use the Makey Makey MakeCode extension that we didn't know existed. That would save us a solid hour of time at least. But like if you haven't seen MakeCode Arcade, for those that this may be a new platform, what you're seeing there is a screenshot of the Makey Makey extension for MakeCode Arcade, and then the simulator that MakeCode Arcade gives. So it sort of looks like an old school, like classic Game Boy. It actually perfectly models to the meow bit from KittenBot, and like it's a free platform where you can go in and create video games. I mean, arcade games. And because of the buttons that are like the buttons that are native in it, it works out. It maps really nicely to a Makey Makey so that you can do this like, I want to make a video game, but I don't want it to look like a Nintendo, as Jim was saying earlier. I want to build custom controllers that are, relevant to the game. And it opens up a whole new pathway for kids to engage in creation, where it's not just like, if I'm super analytical and logical and coding makes sense to me, great. But if I'm like incredibly creative and want to build these like tactile things, there's a space for me too. And that sort of seeing myself in this space, I think, is a resounding theme for us. It increasingly in our work, it's about student empowerment. We can get into nuts and bolts of like how to plug up the Makey Makey and that sort of thing, but that's really best suited for like a YouTube tutorial where you needed to see it 75 times. But like conceptually, when kids see themselves, like when they start to discover their identity, right? I'm good at this and I like it. That's really empowering because now I can make informed decisions about my future. And I want to pursue this because this could become a passion for me. Is very different than I'm pursuing this because some adult told me it's a lucrative career field.
Mhm.
So Michael and Jim, I'm going to ask my question here. Sorry, Colleen, to step over you, but have you guys tried this format with different? You mentioned Scratch before, but have you tried it with different software platforms? And if so, is there like, can you just maybe put some words to like why MakeCode Arcade works so well over other platforms, and kind of speak to that?
Jim, you want to start there? Then I've got a couple ideas on the back end. I think I know where you're going.
So I'm gonna go back one slide. So
Yeah.
a different format. It's very similar to this. So my school also uses Makey Makeys in a full PBL unit, right? So we have a 9-week unit that we use, but we use Scratch, right? So based on your question, it's for different reasons. So one of the great things about MakeCode is all the stuff is right there, and it's easy to find what you're looking for to copy and make. Where in Scratch, the purpose is different. What we want our kids to do is to code from zero.
Mhm.
So for us, in order for us to get our kids to fully function in games, we had to use the method we used with the Blue Sky one-day event. For the method that we use in this one, it's a cross-curricular PBL with 5 different subjects, 10th grade subjects. We use Scratch because we want kids to code and use Makey Makeys. But the philosophy that we used with the Makey Makeys was the same, which is don't make one that looks like a joystick. Go crazy, right? Like we want you to use digital fabrication tools to an nth degree. So instead of them being cardboard, they may be CNC routed or using some type of laser cut with acrylic. So the quality of the joystick actually is quite higher as well, because they have it 9 weeks to work on it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think, Derek, to build on that, like, so in the school context, what Jim's talking about, that's pretty clear in sort of in that setting. We've also done some work with this. So certainly with Scratch. Oh, I just blinked. Oh, so like even in earlier grades, like with Code Ninjas, or not Code Ninjas, Code Spark Academy, think platforms like that, right? Essentially, we just pay attention for any software platform, gaming platform that uses the arrow keys, right, instead of the mouse. Like it's sort of an automatic. We've just started developing a mindset that like the moment we see up, down, left, right, or ASDW, we're like, oh, that's a Makey Makey. Like we can immediately co-opt that for Makey Makey. And so like we love to do that, whether it's video games or music or whatever, right? There's lots of, I mean, obviously we're preaching to the choir here, but there's lots of examples for that. I think some of it is the audience and the use case, right? So for us, as Jim said, in the game design challenge, MakeCode Arcade was best suited because of that sort of multiple on-ramps. I could start with a blank screen, I could start with a platform, or I could start with somebody else's game and run. You could certainly do the exact same thing with Scratch. Just traditionally, what we've seen from Scratch is a pretty polarized, it's pretty polarized in terms of level, right? So like many of the Scratch games we see that are already available, or Scratch apps that are already available, are either like late elementary, early middle school appropriate, or they're like college level, and it's hard for students to like get their head around like this matters to me and I can do it. And MakeCode Arcade, because it feels like, right, it feels like you're playing Asteroids or an app on your phone. You make Flappy Bird, you can make Nintendo, Mario-esque kind of games. Like I think that feel helps high school students look at it and go, oh, this isn't for kids. Like this is some real stuff. I've played this game on my phone before. I think that level of authenticity helps create some buy-in.
Yeah, and Scratch is so open. Like it's so open. Like you could make a musical instrument. You could make your research presentation on it. You can make an animation. There's like so many things you could do. It could feel a bit like the blank paper syndrome, where there's so many things that you can see.
Well, I think too. Oh, sorry, Colleen.
Oh, I'm just asking Jim to go back one slide and you keep talking. Or to slide 20. That one.
Yep.
Nope, the next one.
One more. So
one more, because this is like the deep philosophy meat. So, and now Derek, whatever you were going to say, go.
Well, I was just going to say, Colleen and I actually had an interesting kind of comparison point between Scratch and MakeCode this past week, because Colleen made the Apple game in Scratch, and she kind of threw it out there and said, hey, make this in MakeCode. And I made it in MakeCode, or very, as best I could, similar, not exactly across the board. But then we kind of looked at it and go, well, there's a lot of blocks here. Like that seems very complicated. But if you because Scratch puts all of the blocks, you put blocks and programs into individual sprites. If you took all those and you put them on the same window, you would get essentially what MakeCode does. So MakeCode is just one programming window. And so a lot of times people will see MakeCode windows and they're like, whoa, that's complicated. But if you made the same thing in Scratch, it's just because you kind of click on the cat and then you program the cat, and then you click on the basketball and you program the basketball, and things are distributed in terms of programming.
But I think too, though, with Scratch, like I knew exactly how to make that in Scratch, and I had no idea how I could make it in MakeCode. If I was going to do MakeCode and do something where my character was moving around, I could do it. But like assigning each character to move separately with different sounds, I was like, I don't know how to do that in MakeCode.
I think that's
just interesting, that kind of differences in the minutia differences between the two. Like they're similar, very similar, and you can move from one to the other, but your mindset has to change a little bit.
Yeah.
The tutorials are nice for MakeCode.
Oh yeah.
If you were to sit good tutorials. Now, CS First has also made pretty good tutorials for Scratch. So
Yeah, my kid is.
For us, we try our best to be like brand or platform agnostic.
yeah,
Because we're so much more interested in like I'll highlight the last bullet there, the focus on the typo, focus on your values, like what you actually value. So it's so easy for us to slip into the like, this is the best platform because X, Y, or Z. And the reality is our focus is on how do we empower kids to develop that muscle to learn anything, right? Like we say all the time, we carry more information in our pocket than I could ever possibly know, right? No one can know as much information as is in their phone. I can't know everything, but I have a responsibility to be able to learn almost anything. And so like how we put kids in situations to be able to learn almost anything, knowing that there's different tools, there's different platforms that are best applied in different situations, right? Like that's a piece that in education, so often, particularly in public education, where scale is such a big thing, right? We think in such big, grandiose scale. We have to design systems that are optimized for efficiency, and the most efficient systems are standardized. So we get in an arms race to standardize. We're going to only use Makey Makey as our hardware, and we're going to only use MakeCode Arcade as our software platform, because from an efficiency standpoint, that's the easiest way to support 200,000 kids in a big school system, right? Like is to isolate and drill in on that. But what we realize is like for us, a heavy value is it's really about empowering students through like to engage in divergent thinking and to develop that muscle of learning. And as they do that, right, the best way to do that is for us to never over scaffold. And when we talk about over scaffolding, that's the adults doing the critical thinking instead of the students, the adults doing the creative process instead of the students, including selecting platforms, selecting hardware, right? So in an individual project, sometimes time is such that you have to, like in the game design challenge, we needed to say, we are definitely going to use Makey Makey and we're definitely going to use MakeCode Arcade. This is the only way we can accomplish this goal. And in that singular instance, right, it's a valuable experience. But overall, we have to work like understanding in individual instances, we understand you have to operate that way. But on the macro level, we want to keep focused on that idea that like, what do we actually value in education? If the goal is moving students down a continuum of growing their ability to learn, we've got to constantly be reinforcing the idea for us as educators, like our goal is to release as much as possible, not grab tightly, right?
Yeah, student choice is like the most important thing. And so, but they have to learn about each thing before they could do it, right? So they have to learn about Makey Makey and Microbit, and then they make their choice afterwards once they've learned them, and in one day you don't have it. So I think it was really good that you showed this with MakeCode and Jim's 9-week project that uses Scratch. I put in the chat a project I did with 5th graders that we took about 2 weeks to create literacy games for kindergartners, and we use Scratch. And it just depends on what you're doing, right? It depends on the goal you're trying to go through. So I just love on here value process over product and encourage the divergent ideas and to let them discover possibilities. And I think that's the hardest thing for teachers, is to let the kids discover. So often we want to share it and show it and teach it, but we want them to uncover those things themselves. So this is a beautiful way to do that. We only have 5 minutes, so if you want to go to the last slide.
I just dropped in the chat while you're switching slides there. Just a quick plug for Jim as he was talking about that PBL unit. The STEM School Chattanooga, which is like legitimately one of the top STEM schools in the country, and they do incredible work. They document. They're a magnet school essentially. In Tennessee, we call them a platform school. They document all of their work. So all of their PBL units, historically, even like their historical units, are all extraordinarily well documented, and they're freely available. So I put the link there to their website. It is a treasure trove of this kind of stuff. So would encourage, if you're interested in more things like this, both with Makey Makey and computer science, but I mean all over the place. It's really interesting work. And then the slide that Jim has up here. We're happy to answer any questions. Thank you guys for having us. I've been using Makey Makey for years. We actually lend them out through a lending library locally. We've got hundreds of them we use all the time in schools. And if you're interested in this kind of work, we wrote a book. Please don't buy the book. It's very small, like more like a pamphlet, but we wrote it so we could have this ebook available. So it's free. If you go to the website there, you can access the whole ebook for free. And we'd be happy to have you check that out and use it at your leisure.
That's great. Your final question is, how would you adapt this for elementary school?
Oh, I actually think we could do the exact same thing for elementary school as long as they as long as they were literate, right? Like third, fourth grade. I think before then you'd have to change platforms. And MakeCode Arcade isn't well adjusted for K2. But once they've got some basic literacy, I think they could I think they could jump in and just kind of go here. We might have to scaffold a little bit, giving them some like typically in this kind of work for elementary, we get into choice. So we give them, hey, here's 5 different games that exist already. You might want to check these out as a starting point. So I mean, I think there'd be some basic scaffolding like that. But by and large, like kids can do hard things.
Yeah, they can. We started today talking about how I went to 3rd grade and was teaching 3rd grade with the apps that we have and how wonderful. So I put the apps in for y'all, how wonderful it was to have the kids plug up apps and just play and understand how Makey Makey works. Because I really think that's what you're going to want to do 2nd and 3rd. And I think even younger than 2nd and 3rd, you're more at their using either teacher created Makey Makey projects or older student created Makey Makey projects. So like I said, I had 5th grade design for kindergarten, which is actually a little too young, by the way. It'd be better because of what you said about literacy. It'd be a little more fun and I'd see more different project ideas if 5th grade did 2nd or 1st grade, because when 5th grade did kindergarten, it was all just number and alphabet, which was still great. Really cool project. So yeah, these are all great ideas. And I love that how happy people are in the chat. They're saying how wonderful you are. Right now, Scratch Junior does not work with Makey Makey because it doesn't have any key presses. It's just press when the flag click, do this. So it doesn't have a key press associated with it. I'd love for that to get a key press associated with it, but it doesn't have one. But regular Scratch works, extension or no, and we're super excited about the MakeCode extension. And I bet Michael and Jim are, because I don't know if they told you, but they had those 100 kids remap Makey Makey to work. So that's just amazing. Thank you.
I would just hate to be the guy that has to remap everything back.
Oh, that's what you do at the end of the day.
Straw on that one, Michael.
You just do it at the end of the day.
No, you send the Makey Makeys, use them in the next project in high school, and they get to redo it.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. So thank you again. And we will share the slides tomorrow. We'll have them up on our blog, the same blog post that had the invite. We'll have the recording and the slides. And thank you so much, Jim and Michael, for sharing your expertise today. We're just blown away by this really cool project that you did.
Awesome. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.